And good morning, afternoon, or evening, and very welcome to the second part of this session on dynamic adaptive policy pathways. And also, of course, thanks to CDRI for hosting this session. The sixth IPCC assessment report has indicated, in fact, that there is a narrowing window of opportunity to shift pathway towards more climate resilience development. At the same time, while there is pressure for climate adaptation, and this pressure is increasing, the risks of maladaptation are also rising. So flexible and robust adaptive plans are required to reduce these risks. And in this session, we will be discussing methodology to develop adaptive approaches, which are both robust and flexible. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speaker of today, Dr. Gundula Winter. Dr. Gundula Winter is an advisor research on coastal risk and climate adaptation at Deltares. She has more than 10 years of experience in coastal engineering, flood modeling, and also served as a contributing author for the sixth IPCC assessment report. Dr. Gundula Winter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessio, for your kind introduction, and also thank you to the ADB and CDR for inviting me to this session. I'd also like to thank the previous speakers, and it was very interesting to listen to you, and I was intrigued, for example, to hear from Danny Robertson and see how planning for climate mitigation links to and also has some similarities with planning for climate adaptation. And I also got from what Antouza presented that a link what I'm going to talk about to the process that he presented on. So let me share my screen. I'd like to talk about the methodology on dynamic adaptive policy pathways that help plan for an uncertain future. So to start with, let me take you to a small island. Consider a village in a small island state made up of around 150 households. Life in the village is generally good, with the villagers having a strong relationship with the sea. The majority of the households earn their livelihoods through fishing, so they choose to live in a series of hut, small timber houses close to the beach, as you can see in this image here. But it's just an example. Palm trees surround the houses, providing shade from the hot tropical sunshine. And the sandy beach, which is approximately 50 meters wide, stretches down to the shore from the tree line. And the community has lived in this way for many years, but in recent times, the villagers noticed that the shoreline in front of their houses appears to be receding every year. There's less and less beach in front of the houses, and during large storms, waves now almost reach up their houses. Big recent storm caused a recession of the beach up to 30 meters in front of the houses. And now after the storm, the beach slowly recovers. So this is an example of what it could look like now. So now next imagine you're in local government, and the newly agreed national adaptation plan requires all local governments to develop plans to climate change. So now you start thinking, and you know you need to consider the effect of climate change on sea level rise, also on storms. But you also need to consider how the demographics on your island might be changing in the future. So there are a lot of uncertain things to consider, and you don't have an idea clearly of how the future will pan out. So what would you do? Your options are, you could construct a seawall to protect the houses, or you could undertake frequent beach replenishments that replace the sand that has been lost to erosion. Or you could implement setback lines, meaning that people have to move further back from the shore where they have their fishing boats. So what option do you think would be best? How will these options perform in different climate change scenarios, sea level rise and demographic scenarios? And can we be sure about what the future will look like? What is more likely? What is less likely? So it is clear that under this deep uncertainty, decision makers should aim for robust plans that can be adapted over time. And this is why Deltares developed the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach that is meant to support decision makers in planning making with a structured framework. So it is a systematic adaptive planning framework that explicitly considers decision making through time. It breaks down big decisions into manageable steps over time, keeping options for the future. And it specifies short-term actions and thresholds that clearly mark when additional actions are needed. So as such, the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach recognizes that adaptation is a path. There's not one path to the solution, but there are many possible paths. And we may need to adapt or change our course of action or switch to another path as new information comes to light in the future. So this approach really helps focus on important questions under deep uncertainty, such as what are low regret actions that we can take now and that contribute to future goals, and also importantly, don't hinder future actions. And what robust and flexible strategies perform well over a wide range of futures. So on the right, you see a stylized pathways map, which will be explained in a short informative video about the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach.
The adaptive pathways approach is modeled on the idea of a metro map. Its essence are sequences of measures over time, or pathways, that reach specified objectives. In this illustration, there are 4 potential actions. Actions A and D are robust. They can withstand a lot of sea level rise and still meet flood risk objectives. Other options are short-term actions, like Action B. This could be, for example, the installation of booster pumps to improve drainage capacity. In this example, once Action B reaches its tipping point, it needs to be augmented by Action A or D. These sequences of actions over time are what we refer to as pathways. Each of the pathways meets the same specified objectives over the entire time horizon, but they each come with different costs, benefits, and co-benefits, which are used to evaluate, together with stakeholders and decision makers, which pathway is most preferred.
So what would that mean for a little imaginary island? So let's have a look at how that could pan out. So you asked an engineering consultant to evaluate the options that you have and provide you with thresholds until when these options would be safe. So in the planning process, you first ask yourself, what are the objectives I want to meet? Probably safeguarding people's lives and livelihoods as fishermen. Next, are there other goals for development? Surely in local government, you want a thriving community. Perhaps you want to establish new sources of income. And what future trends are uncertain that you need to consider? It's the impacts of climate change on storms and erosion, and it's sea level rise. So on the right hand side, you see the IPCC sea level rise projections from August 2021 and the different SSP scenarios. And you see until the mid-century, 2050, they're all still fairly close together, but then there's a big difference in the various scenarios, and also the high end, something that you might need to consider. So your engineering consultant provided you with details about the options you're considering, and you now know what the tipping points of the 3 options you consider are, and you can start mapping out your pathways. So first, you draw your governing condition, which is sea level rise, and you add the sea level rise scenarios you want to consider. Might come from IPCC projections, local project planning scenarios. You plot then the sell-by date for the current situation and the sell-by dates of the options that you're considering. And we already see the seawall has an earlier tipping point than beach replenishments and the implementation of setback lines. This is now only valid for this example, and it will need to be always carefully assessed for each application. So now we can start to plot logical action sequences. So we can still make it work with options that have an earlier sell-by date. So when the sell-by date of seawall date is reached, we would need to take the next action and move on to consider beach replenishments or the implementation of setback lines. And we can also consider logical action combinations that will extend the life of any of these policy actions. So we can combine seawall with beach replenishments or beach replenishments with setback lines. So you now have a small set of pathways, and what you need to do now is engage with the stakeholders to choose preferred pathways. And for that purpose, Deltares developed several tools for engagement. We have developed the circle tool, which is an interactive tool that can be used with stakeholders in a workshop setting to map critical infrastructures, their relations, and to assess cascading effects. For example, in a disaster event, when power supply fails, other critical infrastructure may also fail. And another tool that Deltares has developed are serious games. They work very well to raise awareness about future uncertainties and risks, and to train stakeholders in this pathways thinking approach. So now we come back to our island. Imagine you have consulted all relevant stakeholders, and you can now identify the preferred pathway. In this example, it was pathway number 4. First, replenish the beach, then implement setback lines, and then combine these setback lines with beach replenishment. This is less costly than seawalls and delivers the most co-benefit replenishments, keep a wide beach. So this was obviously just an imaginary example, and Deltares has applied the framework in several real-world examples, of which I want to highlight 2. We applied the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach in the Netherlands for long-term adaptation pathways to potential high-end sea level rise scenarios in the Netherlands. High-end and long-term meaning sea level rise in excess of 2 or 3 meters, which is a huge challenge for a low-lying delta country like. So first, an inventory of adaptation options in the 4 solution spaces was made, and these 4 solution spaces that are considered Netherlands are to advance the coastline, to protect the coastline and close it off, to protect the coastline and keep it open. That means that the rivers are still open and there are dikes along the rivers to protect low-lying areas from flooding, or to accommodate sea level rise. This can entail relocation or building flood-proof. So the current approach is protect open. The rivers are all open, and dikes are built along the rivers, and the rivers can be closed off very large storm surges. But this will not work anymore when sea level rise is higher and the rivers cannot freely flow into the sea anymore. This is because salt intrusion will become an issue, agriculture won't be possible anymore. And if you have a large storm surge in combination with river discharge, then the river flood waves will become blocked and be discharged into the ocean. So the goal is was to develop an adaptation strategy for the next 100 or 200 years and beyond, which will require transformational change in a delta area like the Netherlands. And that needs a lot of time. So the theme here is anticipate the worst, but hope for the best. And another example that I would like to highlight are the Marshall Islands. They're low-lying atoll, and they have limited area of higher ground to retreat. So we developed different pathways for different island types, rural islands and urban islands. And the current protection strategy will not be sufficient anymore as soon as sunny day tidal flooding will become so frequent and flood damages to storms unacceptably frequent that people cannot live there anymore. So develop different strategies considering the different solution spaces: protect, brace, reclaim, and reclaim, relocate, or migrate, and made a first order estimate of the costs that would be associated with pathways for sea level rise up to 2 meters, which provided useful information to the Marshall Islands government in the forming a strategy for adaptation. So if you have any more, so if you're looking for more information on the adaptive pathways approach, you can visit our website at www.deltares.nl/adaptive pathways. Thank you.